There's 4 of us today, as you can see. Oh, I gotta move this forward. We have 17 Hawaiian-focused charter schools, but what we also have to work is kind of guide our work along and collaborate, help make sure that we're moving towards our targets. We have a steering committee, and today we have 4 of us here to share. Myself, Charlene Ho, and then we also have Allyson Tamura from Kanu, Aina Charter School on the Big Island, and Mahina Duarte also from Kanu, Aina, and Dr. Meahilahila Kelling from Kamakau on Oahu. So the rest of them are amazing people, but we couldn't get them here today, so we'll do our best to share. What we're hoping is that you will go away with some sense, a better understanding of our Hawaiian-focused charter schools, that you'll have an understanding of what we're trying to do around culturally relevant assessments and what do we mean by that. We have some deliverables or some tools or some information that we've developed along the way in these packets that you've received.
There's a stack of them on the last row if you walk through.
If you're just coming in. Thank you. And we'll kind of walk through them as the different presenters talk about their work groups process and efforts to develop tools to make this happen. And then we're hoping that we feel what we're doing is not just relevant to Hawaiian-focused charter schools, but really relevant to educational programs wherever, however. A culture, every school has its own culture. And sometimes it's science, sometimes it's arts, sometimes it's Hawaiian-based. It just depends on the particular model. But what we're developing, we feel is relevant to any setting. We have charter schools on 4 of our islands. 17 of them are Hawaiian-focused, 14 of which are startup charters. We'll talk a little bit about what does that mean, and 3 are conversion charters. 6 of our Hawaiian-focused charters are also immersion programs. We serve over 4,000 students. Approximately 80%, 81% or so are self-reporting as Native Hawaiian, and 88% of our schools have received their WASC accreditation. Just to give you a quick look at it. As you are aware, I'm sure, the original educational tradition in Hawaii was oral-based to the level that we know through one-on-one teaching or small group teaching, from kahuna to new learner and so forth, from family to family. With the introduction of the missionaries and others coming into the Hawaiian Islands, the alphabet was introduced, and then the introduction of the printing press in the early 1800s led ultimately to over 120 newspapers in the Hawaiian language. So Hawaii went from a non-print communication process to a printed process with nearly 95% literacy in our populace. The Hawaiian-focused charter school initiative really, I think, more than anything, is trying to help our communities go from peak to peak. As you may be aware, our Hawaiian students don't always succeed in the existing educational settings. So how do we reclaim that level of propensity toward learning and toward building capacity in reading, in literacy, in some of the areas that don't always seem to be areas of success for Native Hawaiian students. Our programs all have an emphasis around language, culture, and building a sense of personal identity and self-esteem. And we felt that what we were working with relative to the assessments generally didn't capture any or much of that. It really always primarily captures those areas of struggle. It wasn't capturing those areas of strength. So how do we do that? How do we tell a deeper, richer story of the growth that's happening in our schools? We partnered with a number of folks in doing this work, and one in particular is Alice Kawakami, and we'd like to share a quote that she has shared, or that she stated in one of her collaborative publications in 2007. She notes, "We have lived under the gaze of newcomers who have evaluated us within their own belief systems, only to find that we are not only different, but also deficient compared to their cultural norms. However, this gaze has come to represent a truth about us, a truth that is not of our own making. It is appropriate that the gaze be returned now and that we do our own gazing." Charter schools are relatively new in the landscape of education. The first charters were started on the continent in Minnesota in 1992. Hawaii was quick to follow, however. And the first charter school was adopted in Hawaii in 1994 that allowed for conversion charters. So conversion charter, you're probably aware, is an existing Department of Education school that chooses to take on the responsibility of having an autonomous board and building an innovative community-based approach. When the law was passed, there were only two schools at the time that took on the challenge of that, Waialae and Lanikai Elementary. I think the legislature felt that they wanted to see more. They wanted to see more innovation. They wanted to see more community-based development because we were all struggling on how do we go, where do we go with education to be better serving our students. And so in 1999, they passed the law that allowed for startup charters. And that truly is a genuinely community-based initiative where within the community, founding committees came together to design what they thought had the promise, I should say, of serving their learners well to help through some of the disconnects and the gaps that they were experiencing. Within 2 years, there were 25 charter schools in Hawaii, 14 of which were Native Hawaiian or Hawaiian-focused charter schools. Our Hawaiian community was more than ready to take up the challenge to, yes, let's try something new, yes, let's do it ourselves, and not say, why aren't you doing it? Let's try it ourselves. So again, the idea is to, how do we reach children in a way that engages them fully so that they can reach their optimum potential? Each of our charters has their own unique mission, vision, and program design. And that's important to us in our work as we do culturally relevant assessment as well. And you'll hear it from each of our work groups as they talk about it. However, we share elements in all of our programs just by the fact that we have this Hawaiian-focused commonality. So what we're hoping is to build on those commonalities. We're hoping to do it in a way that reinvigorates not only the Hawaiian practices, but helps us connect past knowledge and wisdom to application and informing what we do in the present and inspiring our future. Our first Hawaiian-focused charter schools actually started in 1999, I believe, and they often started from schools within schools that were already happening and ready to go. Most of them began in 2000 and 2001, and from the get-go, there were efforts to collaborate, informal efforts. Nale Na'ao, if you've heard of that organization, was pulled together just to have time to talk story and share problem solving, share opportunities, to share resources so that we could grow together, support each other in that growth. In the mid-2000s, Kamehameha, after they completed their first strategic plan in the 20th, what are we, the 20th century, 21st century, wherever we are, decided that this strategy of having community-based education is something that made sense relative to serving the broader Hawaiian community as well. So look to pulling together opportunities for the po'o of the various schools to come together in a regular PLC format. Again, to share, to address challenges, and to identify resources and bring them to that work together. In that work, again, that effort to really defend the diversity is essential. We feel there is no one size that fits all. There's no magic answer for everybody. There needs to be choice for learners and families to best support the learner style and area of interest and focus. However, again, we have that common ground. So what we did in the mid-2000, or 2005-ish, not mid-2000, but around 2005-ish, we started to really look at our individual missions and visions to see where are we definitely overlapping, where if we could aggregate our data, we could tell that bigger story again, that deeper story of growth. And in that process, in 2007, I think, or so, or 9, or wherever it was, recently, we came to work with School Rise and Alice and her team. And in 2013, we identified these areas: cultural knowledge and responsibility to family, community, and environment, college, career, and community readiness. So it's not about me, myself, as a learner. It's about my kuleana as to myself, to my family, community, and beyond. And how do I prepare for that? And then, of course, proficiency in academic basics. We'd like to share a kind of a brief video to give a sense of our students at various points of transition within our programs. See if I can do this properly. It's not my forte. Not my forte. Very quickly, just to give you a sense of the process of this particular project, this particular collaborative project, The concept for doing our culturally relevant assessment work began in the school year 2013-14. We're in our third year of the project right now. We're expecting a fourth year of the formal, trial and testing and refining of what we're working on, what we'll share with you today. But more than that, we expect a continuous collaboration as we involve the process in our implementation. All of our work is led by Hawaiian-focused charter school Ho'okumu. As I said a number of times, we honor the individual missions and visions of each of our schools, and we look for ways to build on and celebrate those areas of common ground, again, to tell a richer story. In your packet, you should see a number of things which we'll talk about as the individual work groups come up, but on the front here, you get kind of front and back, you get kind of a general overall view of the processes that we've gone through to get where we are in the moment. All of our work teams, all of our work groups have integrated the work identified in the Nakopina'a'o Board of Education policy. We find that very relevant and again, workable across all educational environments. So with that, I'd like to please bring up Ally, and she'll go into our first work group discussion.
Aloha, everybody. My name is Allyson Tamura, and I'm the elementary principal at Kanu Aina Public Charter School, which is on the Big Island in Waimea. So, as our handout shows, if you don't have a handout, I left some on the back row, but if not, just raise your hand and we can get some to you now, or we have some on this table here. But as you see in the handout, and as you heard Auntie Charlene share, all of our Po'okumu or Po'okula head of schools for our 17 Hawaiian-focused charter schools split into 3 different work groups. And the 3 work groups that we split into was either readiness, interim growth, or cultural competency. So I'll be presenting a little bit about what the readiness group has done, the work that we've done together. Okay, so the first thing that my work group did was we looked at what readiness meant. Yeah, maybe I should change the slide. There you go. But we looked at what readiness meant. And for us at Hawaiian-focused charter schools, it didn't just mean ready for college and careers, but it also meant ready for our communities, yeah? Because communities are just the foundation of all of our schools, yeah? We're community-based schools. And so the definition that we came up with is that it would be readiness for the next level within community, formal schooling, post-secondary education, and training and careers. And the process, and again, this can be found under the readiness part of your handout here. But the process that we did was, after we came up with our definition for readiness, we inventoried all of the 17 Hawaiian-focused charter schools, and we asked each other, what do we do to measure readiness at our schools? What are we already doing? How do we know that a student is ready to move from grade 5 or grade 6, your elementary, to your middle school? How do you know if they're ready to move from middle school to high school? Yeah? How do we know if they're ready to graduate and serve their communities? How do we know if they're ready to go to college, if they should choose that path? And how do we know if they're ready for the workforce or career, if they should choose that path? Yeah? And so what we did is we took the time to actually have all of the schools go back, all of the PO'o or all of the leadership, principals, directors of schools, go back to their schools and find out how teachers were measuring this. And we, it's harder than you think. Might be a simple question, but you gotta really go back to your schools and dig deep. The charter schools that we come from, some of us are K-12, so that means asking teachers or PUMU how they measure this from kindergarten all the way to grade 12. Some of us are just middle school, some of us are middle school, high school, or K-8 schools. So it took us some time, but we came up with an inventory of what people were doing, and the ones that, what stood out the most was almost all schools had some kind of rubric, or not rubric, I take that back. All schools had some kind of transitional plan in place, or a personal learning plan. And so we decided to start there, and we called it a student success plan. Everybody has different names for it, whether you call it at your school a student success plan, personal learning plan, personal transition plan, or maybe just a portfolio that students take from grade level to grade level to show that they're ready for the next grade level. But a lot of schools had that in place, so we started there. The next thing we did in our process was we reviewed a lot of literature. What was the literature saying out there? You know, what was the research behind student success plans and student learning plans? You know, what did a good plan have in place? What did a good process look like? And with that, we sat down, and based on what all schools were doing and working on at their schools and what the research said, we came up with a student success plan rubric draft. And you have a copy of that with you today. It looks like this. Yeah? I have it on a slide a little bit further. Actually, I'm going to go back one more. We came up with this draft, and I'll talk a little bit more about this and what this means and how we use this. But I wanted to point out in this slide, as part of our process, is after we developed this, we actually self-assessed our schools. So 17 Hawaiian Focus Charter schools used it, went back and assessed their schools and reported back. And that allowed us to tweak it, make changes, make sure it was usable, make sure it was doable at a school. And then we actually asked our staff, and we got 70 staff members, or 70 kumu, to also pilot this and use it and rate their school's process on it, and then give that information back to us. And then we did more tweaking, more fixing, changes, reworded things. And then we got 48 student focus groups to give us feedback. So this is leadership or principals at their schools sitting down with students and their portfolios or their learning transition plans and asking the students, you know, what's the most important part of that plan? What do you even do with it? You know, do you share it with your parents? Do you use it in your next class when you move from grade level to grade level? And we got them to give us feedback about their plans, and then rate them, you know, rate the schools on it, and give us feedback on our rubric too. And then we also had graduate surveys that gave us more feedback. And so, let me share. Did I hit forward? Okay. So wanted to point out is when we came up with this process rubric and when we created it, we decided to choose 3 strands, and we aligned them with 3 of the objectives in Naho Pena'ao. And they are Ho'okela, which is excellence. Yeah, demonstrate skills and knowledge through a variety of assessments that communicate progress and achievement in meaningful ways. Kuliana makes decisions and uses a variety of assessments to develop and achieve short and long-term goals. And Malama, total well-being, identifies and uses adequate support systems to achieve short and long-term goals that contribute to self, family, Aina, community, and the world. And so that became our 3 strands for our process rubric. Okay. Under each strand, you can see the dimensions that we came up with, and then of course you can see the rest of the rubric. Yeah. Is that my time? Time up, Allie? All right. So what I want to share is that I want to remind you that this is a process rubric. So it's not a rubric that you would take back to your school and you would have the students take out their portfolios and you would rubric their portfolio. That's not the way this is used. This is for a school to use to see how are they implementing. You make data decisions and whatnot. So use the data. So if a school had portfolios going on or student success plans going on at their school, and you're checking your process with our rubric, you would be emerging, right? If you guys follow me? If your process only had maybe quantitative data, or actually let's go assessment process is probably easier. Under assessment process, it's the 4th one and the blue one. Yeah. And it says right there, under emerging, maybe your process only utilizes state mandated standardized assessments. So portfolios might only include HSA and Smarter Balance assessments or data in there, okay? But if you are a school that is implementing Satisfactory, then your school would, your students' portfolios or success plans, right, would have multiple assessments, including teacher-generated ones, student self-assessments in it, and they would be aligned to student outcomes and give individual student feedback. And if your school was exemplary in that area, then your students' portfolios or success plans would have all of those multiple assessments, but it would include student self and even peer-generated assessments, and it would be aligned to your outcomes, individual student feedback, and developed collaboratively together. Yeah, so that it's also student-driven. So that's how you would use this rubric. Okay, not per student portfolio. So what our group is working on now is, after we've presented this and we've shared this with our teachers, shared this with our staff members, we're looking at student success plan process rubrics for the student ones, because that's what Kunu want and that's what teachers want. We don't have anything drafted just yet, just a lot of talk and discussion, and we're actually bringing teachers to the table to help us with that. And we're starting off the same way with the same process by having schools share what they already have in place. We are also taking a look at Ho'ike capstone budget continuums. And so another thing when we did our inventory across all of our Hawaiian focused charter schools is that what we have in common is Ho'ike, authentic assessments or performance-based assessments. And so we are looking at creating a process continuum to help schools make sure that their progress or their process is rigorous. Yeah. And then last but not least, another thing that all the Hawaiian focused charter schools have in common is we all give graduate surveys to all of our graduates. And so we've been looking a lot at that information and seeing how we can tweak or how we can maybe get those graduate surveys to give us the information we're looking at, make sure it's more aligned with information that we need as a school so that we can continue our improvement process. So we're looking at refining our graduate surveys. We're also looking, because right now we only give them to 12th graders or seniors, so we're also looking at modifying them so that we can give them to the other exiting grade levels, like 8th grade if your school is only a middle school, or 5th or 6th grade if your school is only an elementary school. So that is to come. Mahalo nui.
I'm Meahilahila Kelling with the Kula Kamakau, and I've been working with 6 of the Hawaiian Focus Charter Schools in the Interim Growth Committee. And I wanted to just point out, this picture here is of Kamakau. And we all know assessments is not always in the form of paper pencil. And I think the authentic assessments that we think about first offhand is hands-on in the community. So here they are taking a transect of measuring the biodiversity of the life here in their community fish pond. I think they're at Kamakau Fish Pond, yeah. And which also goes back to measuring the health. Yeah, the health of the community. If there's enough food within the fish pond, it's enough to feed their whole community. So this here is an assessment. I mean, for us to broaden the Mana'o assessment, where we're measuring whether a child or a student can work and produce in this fashion. So interim growth, our goal really is to measure the growth of our students through a rigorous, relevant, and really for us, charter schools is a vision and mission driven assessment to show a holistic picture of each of our students. And so some schools, some of us, we're working with our 6 specific schools in the community at the moment, but some of us have chosen to work with an external developed assessment such as NWA, STAR, those kinds of assessments. Yeah, and others have selected to develop their own assessment that they develop within the school community. And so you'll see actually both pieces. So there is a template in your packet, and I apologize, I think it came out stapled in the wrong order, so you have to kind of look at the sections. A picture is the first page, so kind of rearrange it according to the sections. So taking us through the process of where we started 2 years ago, and similar to the readiness group, the first task that we completed was to really inventory all of the 6 schools, all of the charters, Hawaiian Focus Charter Schools, 17, on what current assessments were they using at the school level. What are some of their data assessment analysis needs at the school? Do they have someone at the school campus who can sit down with their instructional staff to go over the data that was collected? How then are we going to use this data to inform instruction to then improve and looking at growth scores of our students? And from that, we developed this tool, the template in the packet, which is, we gave it a really long name. We think that means, but it's the interim growth validation and process review tool. Because the purpose of this tool is really to take the schools through a rigorous self-reflection process on them identifying their own school assessments to use. So questions such as, how is it vision and mission aligned? And they'll have to kind of explain or rationalize why is it vision mission aligned? How many times a year is it assessed? To which grades? What language? Because we do have 6 of our 17 charter schools are also Hawaiian immersion schools as well. We then engaged with the community, including charter school commissioner and the staff, who have helped in the refinement and the further development of the tool. And so this is like maybe version 6, 7, and I think we've still made edits from this one that you see in front of you to add an analysis piece at the end. And we'll continue to revise as we get further feedback. And as the schools are piloting and realize, hey, you didn't ask this question, or this would be important for me to know in selecting my tool. This past year, in year 2, this year that 15, 16 year, the 6 schools piloted this assessment tool with an assessment they identified at the school level. And so this year, we're continuing that process, and we're also adding an additional school from one of our other 2 committees. So we're trying to scale out slowly and see how that'll work. Within the tool, you see these various components. So the rationale, why is this work important for us, for the Hawaiian Focus Charter Schools? Setting the criteria, because I think to be clear that it has to be vision mission aligned. It has to be an assessment that you already have data for the past, preferably 2-3 years, so that you can set your targets for this current year. So that you can see the criteria within the template. So, and as well as going through the rigorous process of why this assessment, how was it validated, and went through what kind of reliability test, whether it's school developed assessment or external evaluated assessment. And like the other committees, we aligned it to the hub. So I think we aligned with readiness in choosing these 3, and you'll see the 3rd committee hit the other 3 pieces that we did not. So in totality, I think we've hit all of the hub pieces. So I think that's it. One other piece that I don't believe is in here we've added recently is the data analysis piece. So once we have the data, the question is then what? How are the schools going to use this data now to inform the kind of professional development offered for the following year? So that self-reflection is within the new template itself. And it's continuously evolving. And you'll see all the other tools are going through the same process. Mahalo. Mahina will go through this, the last committee.
Yeah, Kamakau. Raise your hand if you have students, you engage with students that really enjoy working with their hands outdoors. Okay. Raise your hands if you have students that love to surf, love to paddle, love to go fishing. Raise your hand if any of those activities you would consider as learning. Okay, so do we. So we believe that many of our cultural activities are educationally rich. So as educators, we know that if our child is learning, then we need to constantly assess and reflect and understand to the extent in which he or she is learning. So our task really first as a working group was to come up with a unified definition of what is cultural competency. Okay, you might see students, if you walk onto our campus, you may see students that are in hula, that are in their gardens, that are making, working with textile, making traditional implements, and to the untrained eye, they might think, oh, they're just doing Hawaiiana, that's 4th grade stuff. Not necessarily so. And this is important for us to come up with a unified definition so that when we're linking our standards, whether it be Common Core or Next Gen Science standards, that it's grounded with our definition, our driving definition of cultural competency, which is Haumana students' knowledge, skills, and perspectives aligned to ancestral learning and assessment. So like my colleagues, you can see that all of our processes, we have 3 working groups. Ours is a cultural competency working group. It's been working for us is that we know that we believe in school empowerment. You know, that's the name of our conference today. And the value of this has been causing all of our staff, whether it be admin, whether it be our SASAs, whether it be our student leaders, whether it be our teachers, we're getting together to come up with processes, with tools and frameworks to assess learning, to acquire and collect evidence of learning, aligned to our school missions, aligned to our common definition of cultural competency, readiness, or integral. To me, that's the #1 takeaway that we want you to grab on, is that schools can develop their own tools for measuring their growth. Okay, so there was basically a 3-phase process. I'd like to invite you to take out this handout and this handout. So start off here. So it's basically a 3-phase process, much like accreditation. Much like WASC accreditation, it involves you forming a school team. And for us, at Kanu, it involves, again, students, teachers, and admin staff as well. Okay, so looking at a cultural competency definition, then the school needs to then determine this colorful side. What do I, as a school, what do we want to measure? Do we want to measure a cultural artifact, which would be in the green area? Do we want to measure academic work, or learning performance on the last part? Okay, so there might be all different kinds of activities, but we've categorized it in 3 different areas. Cultural artifact, an example of that might be maybe your seniors for graduation, they are challenged with making a feather lei, a leihulu, very intensive. Okay, there's a lot that goes into that. So that might be an example of a cultural artifact. Academic work, it might be a senior project, yeah, and they have to defend how they've incorporated cultural knowledge to undertake a local challenge and use cultural practice to help solve for that problem within their local community. And then lastly, performance. It might be maybe May Day performance. It could be an 8th grade defense. Could also be a performance for some. It could be performance of a particular hula or their genealogy to their families. So what you do then is that you in phase 1, you bring your school team and we undergo a set of questions. To see how you're ready, which category you're gonna pick, and then we start to collect evidence. So what we do is we go on a school tour We have an outside committee that comes in, works with their school committee, help them to formulate, and then we start to collect evidence and we ask them a series of questions that helps them to understand one of the 3 areas that they're interested in. So if it's cultural artifact, we want to know if their students can use lessons from the past to navigate challenges impacting their future. If we're going to be collecting evidence on academic work, we want to know whether students can provide solutions to problems that are influenced by data, experiences, relationships, to better understand and meet their new kuleana. And then finally, if they selected ceremony, they want to understand. We like to understand and see that students can demonstrate their readiness to progress to a higher level of kuleana. All of our work is aligned with Naho Pina'a'o. Currently, where we're at is we have done 3 different school site visits. Where we're going to land at the end of this school year is we're going to come up with, we have a set of interview questions for a protocol for our school visits, for a pre-visit, then the actual school visit. Then we have a protocol process for reviewing. The school will review the artifacts together, and then we have a reflection report back, much like WASC. So we collect the evidence, we reflect with the school staff to see whether or not, and to the extent that they are meeting their cultural competency goals in alignment with our overall definition. So just to kind of round out the presentation this morning, one of our alumni said, "My parents want to give me the value of education that they were unable to have when they were in school. They want us to be proud of who we are because we deserve to be the type of people that our kupuna were. It is not our fault that our practices were interrupted, but it is our kuleana to make sure that it does not happen again." So we wanted to make sure that we spend a good portion of our time. I think we have about we have about 7 minutes left with you. I'd like you to take 2 of those minutes and turn and talk with a partner and talk about any of these tools that we've offered today. Might culturally relevant assessments add value to your school? What we're saying is that we have 17 schools that believe in the premise of school empowerment, and we won't lie, it's taken a lot of work, and we as school faculty members and so forth, we know it's just it can be just one more thing on top of a very stringent agenda, trying to balance our time with meeting standards, with taking tests. However, for us, the reason why we're bought into this, at the end of the day, it's all about our children getting the best education that they can. And we believe the tools that we've created, it's with our intention that they're more whole student-centered, whole child-centered, student outcome-centered, and it aims, when done well, it aims to cultivate healthy families and healthy communities. So if you would join us in having a conversation with a partner and ask one another, would these kinds of tools be beneficial to your schools, and what kind of tools would you would want to cultivate and generate in your own school settings? Mahalo. 2 minutes. And respond to this general question.
Well, I have one that's not school specific.
Doesn't have to be.
First of all, we've talked about how important this work is and how thankful we are that you, as the consortium of schools, took this on as a necessity. But we would love to see this not be a nice to have, but a must have across the board.
Anybody else who would like to share? Anything you discussed with your partner?
Okay, so one of the things that came up in our discussion, both of us teach Spanish at Waipaka High School.
Oh, wonderful.
And so for us, it's kind of like this balancing act of the culture that we're trying to teach, the Spanish cultures, with the culture of this place, this Hawaii, and then the cultures of our individual students. And most of our students are Filipinos, and so how balance that, and the other students that we have in Samoan, Indonesians, etc. And so it's just kind of going forward, trying to figure out how we can connect all of this balancing act that we have to do.
I don't think you're unique in that. I think we have that same kind of challenge. And though we have a high percentage of self-report Native Hawaiian, there are also multiple cultures and oftentimes much stronger in your other cultures. So it's the idea of how do you ground a student in a cultural context, and if we can do that well and deeply, they can transfer that to pretty much any setting. And whether it's the ethnic or that kind of culture, where it's really, really deep, or whether it's looking at the arts or looking at science or whatever, it really can be part of the conversation. But you gotta work on it, right?
I had something else that I was going to share, but I really want to expand on that. So I teach at a military school, so I have kids that aren't from Hawaii, and they come from a variety of backgrounds, and the military itself has its own culture. But I think that my students, even like not being from Hawaii, having their own culture, can benefit so much by learning about Hawaiian culture and about the other cultures present in Hawaii. I think it's not just letting students or allowing students to show what they know through cultural assessment, but also exposing students to other cultures and developing that cultural competency in cultures outside of their home culture.
Agreed. Thank you. Allowing them to share that with each other too.
Part of global citizenship. Thank you. Anyone else? How about some general questions for us? I know we don't have too much time, but any general questions about our tools or suggestions?
Well, we did that.
What's changed in the group of schools as a result of beginning to use these various assessment tools? What's changed in terms of practice at the schools? What have you realized we need to change or do differently?
I know for, I'll just use one teacher's words that, so here I am, we came back from winter break, and I'm sitting at my desk. Maybe some of you can tell I'm getting over a cold, so I'm trying to keep away from everybody. But on that staff day between semesters, at the teacher work day on the 6th of this month of January, I had a staff member who was signing in the office, and I said, hey, how was your winter break? And we chatted a little bit. I said, oh, what are you guys working on today? And they said, electronic portfolios. And I said, oh, awesome. How's that going? And they said, well, we're eager to start because we're looking at that process rubric that you shared, and we're going to make sure that we're aiming for exemplary in the way that I guide my kids to work on their portfolio to get ready for spring student-led conferences. And I was like, you so made my day, thank you. But I mean, so that's what we want our teachers or our kumu to do is, just because they did the self-assessment last school year and they might have rated our school as emerging in some parts, we want them to go back to that process rubric for readiness and say, I don't want to just be emerging. We want our school to come out as exemplary. So how can I change what I do or the facilitation that I give to my students for their portfolios to get our school to exemplary? So that's one way. I don't know if anybody else has.
So one thing I can add, and it goes more to the school level versus the students, but I think through the process, definitely strengthening of relationships between these schools. So now I think we're better able to call across to a different school and say, hey, I have a problem with this, or this is my dilemma, how have you experienced it, and how have you dealt with that? So I think the relationship piece, just through the collaboration process, has strengthened.
I think for our group, the cultural competency, it's what we've discovered is that it's really caused us to look very seriously about our school missions and what it means, and unpacking it down to the operational level and down to the academic level, and looking at assessments to really understand how are we utilizing cultural practices to meet our unique school mission.
Just from someone that gets to visit many of those schools, I've noticed a change in how intentional schools now are to focusing on those cultural practices.
I think it has. It's brought the conversation to sort of regular instead of, oh, we gotta listen to that. I think that's
They want.
Can I make a comment? Incidentally, I just want to congratulate you girls, because I remember when you guys started on it, you would come a long way. But what you have done is you've been very inclusive in the process. You have gotten all the stakeholder groups to input into your process. And to me, that's what it's all about, because then everybody owns it and you're going to get the buy-in, you know. But I look at what you folks have done with this as the same way I look at education 30, 40 years ago, where there was no research to back up, and the teacher went into a classroom, it was hit or miss, and you know, those poor kids suffered, even my kids suffered under my tutelage at that time. But you have done for the cultural community the same kind of thing that education, the movement that education has made historically. And I really congratulate you ladies. And you know, you picked three, you tied everything in so well with the Naho Pena'au. And I love it. I absolutely love what you've done.
I think we're up out of time, but if you folks want to stay in contact at all, we'll share our information. Here it is.
One thing with your time, they were kind of going longer. That's why I came in late, because they said, no, it's going to start later. But you guys started at 5:25.
Yay!
So I think you have a few extra minutes if there was something else you wanted to share.
Just real quick, besides, because I see some of you taking pictures, but right here on the top, if you forget, or maybe you delete your picture later by accident, right here on the very top, it's really small, but the Google Drive address is right there, and so is our presenter contact.
Thank you. We'll stick around if you wanted to have individual conversations. Mahalo for joining us today. Enjoy the rest of your conference.